Hello everybody, and welcome to a new episode of Gaming in the Wild, a video games podcast about games from the creative, artistic side of the tracks, from indie to AAA. My name's John, I'm your host, and this week in Reykjavik, I'm not there. I'm actually back in the UK for a little pre-Christmas family flyby in the leafy Staffordshire countryside. But I do have an episode for you, and it's quite a special one. I've been a big fan of the Short Game podcast for as long as I've been playing games in this latest phase of game playing, and I'm very happy to be joined by Raygan Kelly, one of the co-hosts of that podcast, this week for another Games of the Year episode. So me and Raygan had a really good chat about his short game and long game habits, golf games, games that he plays, how he plays them, retro games. We had a really nice chat, and it was really good to catch up with Raygan. This is the second Games of the Year podcast in the series that I'm going to do. Last week we had Brad Galloway. I really love to round up what was good about the year that's just gone, what games were the best, and get different personalities with different tastes and different voices into the podcast, and really get a good mixture to look back across 2021. And so it was really fun to have Raygan on. It's his first time as a guest on the show, and I hope that you enjoy our conversation. But before we dive into that conversation, I would just like to mention that Gaming in the Wild is patron supported, so if you enjoy this episode today, or if you're a long-term listener who wants to support the show, you can do so at patreon.com/gaminginthewild from as little as $1, €1, or £1 a month, and you'll get extra episodes, sale recommendations, and an invitation to our lovely little Discord community that exists around the podcast. So you're very welcome to do that. It's patreon.com/gaminginthewild. Thanks to all of my existing patrons, and thanks to you if that sounds interesting. And with all of that said, let's move on. I hope you enjoyed this great Games of the Year conversation with Raygan Kelly. Okay, so I'm very happy to be joined this week by one of the hosts of the Short Game podcast, Raygan Kelly. Hello Raygan, how are you?
Hi, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thanks for agreeing to do it. I've been listening to the Short Game for quite a while. It was actually one of the first video game podcasts that I found, and one of the inspirations for this show. So it's really nice to have you on today to talk to you.
Thanks. It's really, really gratifying to hear. Yeah, we just reached 300 episodes with the Short Game, which is mind-boggling to think about. And been doing it since sometime in 2014, and it's always just been a sort of little hobby. But when we started actually doing more to actually interact with our community, it suddenly became this whole thing where like, oh wow, there's actually people listening out there. So that was when I met you, John. Thank you for supporting the show, and I've been enjoying listening to your show as well. It's been great.
Yeah, the Short Game was a really nice find for me actually, because I think you've probably heard my story of dropping out of games for a long time and then coming back a couple of years ago and discovering that indie games had become a thing. And I was kind of looking through games media, trying to find some that spoke to me and had the right kind of tone. And a lot of it is, I don't know, very kind of heightened sort of energy drink, YouTuber energy. And so it was a real pleasure to find something like relaxed and at the kind of tone that I could listen to. And the aesthetic of covering indie games and short games was something that I really appreciated. So I felt like I'd kind of found my home for games media when I found the Short Game.
Thanks. Yeah, that's always been my feeling too. Like we thought about starting the show. I thought about starting the show as a YouTube channel, but first of all, back in 2014, it was YouTube was a sort of a different landscape. But I've always been more in love with podcasts. I like to listen to them when I'm doing other things, and there's just all these little elements that are more I respect people who do YouTube and things like Twitch. Like it's a difficult job, and it's a different way of being on, a different sort of energy that they have to bring to that sort of thing. And it's just an enormously larger amount of work. Like I tried making YouTube videos every now and then, and it's just a nightmare to do for me anyway. I think some people it comes more easily to them, but that is not for me. So, but yeah, podcasting, it's just what works for my brain. I like to I like to, you know, sit and chat with friends into a mic, and I don't so much like to like stare into a camera and make sure that my background looks nice and my, you know, don't have anything in my teeth and all of that. That's, you know, just appearing on camera is a different level for me that I'm not as comfortable with. So
okay, so now we all know that as you're podcasting, you have spinach sticking out of your teeth and you're sitting in a room full of trash.
Well, one out of two of those is probably true, and I'm not going to tell you which. Yeah.
But one of the first questions I've got for you here actually is that you have an interest in retro consoles and CRT monitors and so forth, and seem to be like an enthusiast of kind of gaming history. And you guys cover games of all types, I guess mostly on modern consoles and PCs on the show. But one of the first things I've got here to talk about is just about your general gaming habits, really, and like what you play on most and what your preferred setup is.
Sure. Well, I mean, it does sort of split like retro versus modern. So as far as my retro stuff is concerned, like you said, I'm a big CRT enthusiast. So I've spent the last several years just combing Craigslist. It's sort of obsessive, really, combing Craigslist for various different CRTs. And I own, last time I checked, something in the range of like 13 or 14 CRTs of various different sizes and types. And so what I have on my desk right now is a 20-inch Sony PVM. Oh, geez, what is the model? It doesn't matter. No one cares. Anyway, it's a nice 20-inch RGB, you know, PVM. And so my, you know, when I'm playing retro games, which is mostly what I do, sort of like to as little time fillers, you know, that's you know, the short game is all about short games, but like a lot of the times you want something that you can play for, you know, 10 minutes or something. And for me, a lot of retro games are that, because, you know, they boot up very quickly. I can, you know, put something in, play it for a little while, you know, die. And in many cases, they're really set up in that sort of very short play session kind of way. So, you know, pop on like Streets of Rage 2 or something and play it for 15 minutes and that's great. And so that's my setup there. I you know, have a kind of a shelf of consoles, and I sort of pop one down, plug it in, play a little bit, put it away, or these days more commonly play on something like Mister, which is like a FPGA sort of console simulation / emulation kind of box thing that is really, really flexible and fast to get going on. So do a lot of that. But that's, you know, with CRTs, it's you're very tied to specific places in your home because you don't want to move them. So pretty much just the one at my desk is the one I'm using day to day. But my more sort of like regular gaming setup situation is, you know, obviously I like with short games, like you kind of value being able to access like, you know, small indies. And so while a lot of those come to consoles, a lot of them come to consoles kind of late, you know? So if you're wanting to try new indies as they're coming out, you're pretty much going to need to be playing on PC a lot. So a lot of my gaming setup kind of revolves around PC, but I also really like the flexibility of being like, you know, when the Switch came out, like I was a total convert. I was like, now I want to play on the couch, you know, with, you know, something on TV all the time, or I want to play in bed, or I want to play, you know, wherever I am in my house. And so this was the year that I really kind of started doing a lot more game streaming, because, you know, I kind of need to be able to play on PC a lot. For show stuff, but I wanted that sort of Switch. Like if you look at like our show from last year, we did a ton of Switch games, and that was just because like we were all kind of like wanting to lay around, I guess. But I think we kind of like didn't cover as many new indies as we wanted to, or at least, you know, within a reasonable amount of time of their release, because we were. You know, we were tied. We were basically just playing Switch stuff. Whereas this year, like I started doing a lot more in-home streaming. So I've got a like a Backbone controller. It's like a little clamp controller for an iPhone that is, you know, not the best controller in the world, but pretty decent. And that, and the fact that I can then stream from my PC to that has been huge. And then I've also, you know, there's nice in-home streaming setups for things like well, basically every TV in my house, things like the Apple TV, or upstairs I've got one of those NVIDIA Shield TVs. And so that's been a huge thing for me in terms of gaming setup this year, is just like game streaming, where I can just sort of get that Switch-like experience of like, I have a game, it's on my PC in my office, and I can play it there, but I can also go to my couch, I can go to any of, a couple of different TVs in my home and kind of pick up where I left off. And, it's been a big thing for me this year. So I'd say probably most of my gaming time this year was either at my desk or, streaming on one of those sorts of devices.
Yeah, that sounds like a fantastic setup, actually. I've got an Xbox attached to a monitor and a PlayStation attached to a TV, and then Switch, and then just a laptop. But I'm not as advanced as you with streaming and using different screens and stuff. I did get a Backbone on your recommendation, actually, and I've gotten some good use out of it, especially with xCloud.
Oh, yeah.
So being able to stream Xbox games and sync cloud saves and so forth.
Yeah, this was the year that I got Xbox Game Pass, and I think I got it pretty early in the year this year. There was I've had been playing mostly on PC, so I thought, hey, well, let me do that and see how that goes. It's been nice because it hasn't been a big year for AAA games for me. I haven't played a lot of. Like, I barely turned on my PlayStation, and I don't have an Xbox. But this was like, I thought maybe I'll check out some of these Xbox exclusives on my PC via Game Pass, and it's been pretty great. But actually, I've mostly been playing on Game Pass the sort of smaller indie stuff. They've done a decent job of picking out some little games that that kind of fill out their catalog with sort of these nice indie stuff. That it was the kind of thing that I was. Probably would have played anyway, but hey, it's on Game Pass. You can just grab it. So that's been big for me this year.
Right. And I thought that, as in the short game, you do an end of year roundup where you guys all bring your favorites to the table. But because of the format of the short game being about games that are roughly under 10-ish hours, is that how you're defining it?
Yeah, we're it's constantly in flux. 10 hours is sort of our When I first started the show, I wanted to go for even shorter than that, and most of the games that we end up loving are shorter than that, somewhere in the 5 or less range. But the 10 plus hours cap is more just sort of because occasionally we play something that's really great that is in that 10-ish hour range, and we want the flexibility to include those things too. But I'll tell you that if I start a game that's going to be 10 hours, there's a good chance I won't finish it unless I really love it. But
because of the format of the show, I thought it might be fun to ask you about your non-short game related habits and give you an opportunity to talk about some of the longer games that you've played this year.
Well, I can talk about a couple. This has not been a big year for long games for me, though. I don't know, what combination of factors has led to this, but like I was looking back over my like Steam library and other devices and trying to think about like what are the long games I've played this year, and there are hardly any. With the amount of time that I have and playing a game a week for the show, I really stick to the short stuff. Some years, I dive into some lengthy RPG or something, and I fit it in around other stuff. But this year, not so much. I started a lot of long games, and I didn't finish a lot of them. Things like I started. What was that anime RPG or like action RPG thing? Geez. I guess one that I did play all the way. Maybe? No, not that one. Although that did look pretty cool, and I thought about checking it out. No, it was something with an. I'll find the name in a moment. It's more of an action RPG than Tales of Arise. It was the Scarlet Nexus. I played a good amount of Scarlet Nexus and didn't finish it. Liked it, but never didn't stick with it long enough to really get through even one of its 2 playthroughs. Let's see. And things like Death Stranding, like I keep starting these games and playing like 5 hours of them and then being like, that was great, and moving on to something else. Sure. Let's see. What else have I played this year? Although I did play all the way through Nier Replicant, the remake of it,
right.
Which I was a massive fan of Nier Automata, and I think that was this year. I better check my Steam thing and make sure I
think
wasn't
Replicant was actually. It won an award for music at the Game Awards, didn't it?
I didn't watch the Game Awards this year, so I don't know. But if it did, good for them, because it's a great soundtrack.
Yeah, I think it did. It did pick that award up. Yeah,
great. It's a weird series, and I don't necessarily recommend it to everyone. But it's a style of storytelling that I think is like really electric. Mm-hmm. Did you ever play either of the Nier games?
I have finished the 2B playthrough of Nier Automata. And I'm stalled midway through the 9S playthrough. But I enjoy it very much. I love the world they've created there, and this, as you say, the strange storytelling and the odd floaty action that it has. There's something about it.
Mm-hmm. The 9S story, chapter is the place where I think most folks get stuck, because it is sort of just a rehash of the one before it, with slightly new mechanics and a little bit of new. But that's one of several endings, and once you get through that second one, then everything else is extremely short. And not to spoil anything there, but it is worth going back to if you ever feel like it. That's a series that I just think is really brilliant, and and playing through Nier Replicant, which I'd never had it before. I didn't own the PlayStation version. And I'd always kind of thought like, well, there's this sort of two versions of that game, and America got the weird version that was sort of like specifically like bowdlerized a little bit for American audiences, and so I thought that's maybe I'll just read about that game instead of ever playing it. But then when they did the remake, I was very excited about that, as I'd been looking forward to for a while, and I just absolutely. Devoured it and played through every ending, and it's it was really exciting to see that, because like having really been a big fan of Automata, there were a lot of echoes of Replicant in that game that I hadn't recognized. So it was very strange going through them in that order, having been so obsessed with Nier Automata and then going back and playing Nier Replicant. But it was still like I think that's actually probably a better order to play them in. It's because then you're kind of jumping first into the one that sort of is a little more modern. Sure. Replicant is a little creaky, despite being a nice remake. So, but yeah,
right,
that's probably the closest to like a really long. Like I think I spent 40 or 50 hours on that, and that's probably the closest to like a really long game I actually finished this year.
And do you think? I mean, remakes have. Obviously quite a lot of scope to them, from rough remasters through to the full Final Fantasy VII Remake treatment. But Replicant was a remaster, right? And I was wondering how it feels to play it, if it stands up with the remaster that they've done.
Yeah, I think it's beautifully done. I've messed around just a little bit with the PlayStation 3 version, and they're not that dissimilar. They tightened up the action a little bit. I think they wanted it to feel a little more like Automata without kind of redoing its combat system entirely. So like how it plays, it's fine. It's probably a little better than the PS3 version. It does have a lot of these sort of game mechanic things in it that are from the era that when that game first came out, it was at a time where sort of the idea of like collectible endings and just like having endings locked behind sort of arbitrary get all the things quest type stuff was pretty common. And so that's still there and is a little frustrating. I will admit to having gotten to the point where like to get the true ending of that game, you have to collect something like 27, I think I'm pulling that number out of the air, but some fairly high number of these like special weapons, some of which can be missed in the main story and require a lot of like, looking under boxes and that kind of thing. Some of them are quest rewards, and it's a lot. There's a lot of weapons that you have to collect in order to get the true ending. And I got something like 60 or 70% of them, and then used a save editor to add the rest to my save file. Because I was like,
PCs.
I know. So I was kind of done with it at that point. I was like, I'm kind of done. I'll look up YouTube videos of how it is that you get all the rest of these, and any that I felt like getting, I went and got, and then the rest I just sort of Control C, Control V'd, because I was already at like 40 or 50 hours and got things to do. But I was still glad I did it. It was really great.
Yeah, that's a big vote of confidence for it, especially if it's not part of your general gaming habits to go that far into a game. That this remake managed to maintain interest for that time.
Yeah, the only long game I'm currently playing is when we have a sort of a week or two where I don't have a game to play for the show. Sometimes I feel a little like lost, like, oh, what do I play if I'm not playing a game for the show? And I've had essentially the last 2 weeks, because we did two weeks where we covered Inscription both times, and I'd already finished Inscription, so I didn't have anything to play that week. And then we did our sort of Q&A episode, and I didn't have a game to play that week. So I was like thinking back over my backlog of games, and I decided to pick up a game that I have been wanting to play for something like 7 years or more. Which was I've always wanted to get into the Etrian Odyssey games. They're 3DS or DS dungeon crawling RPGs that are very, very crunchy. That's the sort of thing, like I'll probably never finish it, but I got through the first dungeon and felt really good about myself. And they're difficult, very sort of traditional dungeon crawling RPGs where you have to draw your own map. On the 3DS, it's a really nice design because you get the game on the top screen and a touch screen at the bottom for your map, and you have to draw the dungeon map as you go. And there's lots of little secrets and things you can discover, while having zero plot. Like, all of the characters are, create your own characters, you name them, you decide what all of their classes are. You're thinking about like party composition and like, where is the next dungeon and how do I get through it? And not at all about a grand story. It's literally like, go do this dungeon, go do the next dungeon. Which, like, for a story focused game person, like it's a strange experience, but it's also really like, it actually made it a little bit easier to get into, because like I can just, okay, going into the dungeon, let's do this, and didn't have to like, go through 3 hours of cutscenes or whatnot before I got into it. So
sure, that sounds good for a pick up and play kind of thing. Mm-hmm. But yeah, as for games that came out this year, we've got a little list of different categories here, just as jumping off points, and of course you do a good short game roundup where you all talk about your favorite games of the year. So not to preempt the short games of the year episode, we can instead just talk about a few different types of games that came out this year and a few things that you've enjoyed.
Sure.
And the first one that we've got here is way back at the start of this year. Was there something that you were looking forward to that had been on your radar for this year ahead, and how did it measure up?
Yeah, so I'm typically kind of immune to hype. I don't do a lot of like looking forward at I'll look a little bit forward on a calendar, mostly for like show coverage reasons. But like I don't have like I don't sit there getting hype about a game that's coming out. And I tend to just sort of pick things up when they come out and not spend a whole lot of mental energy like looking forward to things. The one thing that you mentioned you wanted to ask about this, and it's a bit of a weird answer, but the one thing that I was really looking forward to this year, for years, was actually a free-to-play mobile game, World Flipper. Did you see anything about that this year?
I've heard about it. I think I might have seen it if it's on Apple Arcade, I might have seen it, but I haven't played it.
It is not on Apple Arcade. It's a like free to play, like the total like standard exploitative bunch of currencies model where you can buy coins for an absurd amount of money. Mm-hmm. And I don't usually play those at all. But like World Flipper is, I have like I will play anything that mashes up pinball mechanics with other genres. And World Flipper is from the same developers as Grand Blue Fantasy, which is like probably one of the most successful and popular sort of gacha games. The sort of character collecting RPGs with sort of slot machine mechanics. and a game that I've tried a little bit of. I was curious about it and gave it a try and thought it was better than I expected, but I didn't put a lot of time into it. World Flipper had been out in Japan for 2 or 3 years, I think, and seemed up my alley in that it has this really great retro aesthetic, like really good pixel art, and also pinball, and it's a neat mashup. And I'd been excited to check it out because it's been years in coming. At first, there was no expectation that there would be an English translation of it, and then we found out it was coming. It was coming out this year, and I had actually been looking forward to it quite a bit. And I actually do totally recommend it. I have not stuck with it through the entire year, but I've put a lot of time into World Flipper on my phone this year. It became the sort of default game that I was like checking in on every day. It's got cute characters and nice, sort of very basic beat to beat RPG story that was actually kind of worth going through the part of it that I did. But its pinball mechanics are kind of fun. You build a little team. Each of your little characters becomes a pinball, and they have different sort of special abilities. And each battle in the story is a different pinball level. And there's little different sort of miniature pinball table layouts, and you have to kind of do trick shots in order to do different types of attacks. And
sure.
I found myself really enjoying it a lot. So maybe not the answer I would be, not my proudest answer, but I spent a lot of time on World Flipper this year, and it's I don't think it was time wasted, and I didn't end up going in for its various coin packs or anything like that. So,
right. Okay, that's an interesting one. I think I must have seen it on the App Store or something. I can visualize the graphic for it. But I do like an occasional pick up and play game too, especially at the moment, traveling for Christmas and that sort of thing. It's nice to have a low concentration game that's just in your pocket and very easy to play. So that sounds like an interesting one to check out. But the next category I've got here is I do get a little bit hype about some games. It's not a lot of games, but there's usually, I was very excited about Sable, having seen a trailer, and Solar Ash and games like that. But there are also games that just come out of thin air and suddenly are the talk of the town. And I'm always a big fan of games like that. Like Inscription was one like that this year for me. I hadn't heard of it, and suddenly it was just everywhere, and so I picked it up and played it. So
that one was quite a surprise.
It was, wasn't it? And I actually didn't know Daniel Mullins before either, although I have gone back and bought his back catalogue now. But I was wondering if there were any games like that for you this year, games that just appeared from thin air and really got your attention.
Probably the closest is Boomerang X, which I absolutely adored. And I had never heard of any of the developers before it came out. I mean, it was a Devolver published game, and so they tend to have a little bit of fanfare even for their smaller indie releases. But like, it came completely out of nowhere. I think I got like a PR email about it or something like that. And half of those just go straight into my spam folder unread. But this one, it had just enough of its own sort of little unique look that I was sort of excited to check it out. And I absolutely loved that game. And it does sort of feel like it came out of nowhere. It has this it feels like if you played retro shooters back in the like early 2000s, things like Quake, and you think back on like what it felt like to move around 3D spaces in those games with things like rocket jumps and high speed movement and everything. Shooters have moved away from that style a lot, and it was kind of incredible to play a game that like felt like it was like an iterative move forward from that old style. It has this very unique kind of main weapon mechanic, the boomerang, and its sort of weird boomerang dash that lets you sort of fly through the air, but it feels like you're playing Quake with a cool mod or something like that, and also a cool art style on top of that. But it that felt like it came out of nowhere. I loved Boomerang X this year.
Yeah, I have actually played that one as well. It's a really fun one. It's a very slick play, isn't it? It feels very the movement feels very fluid in it, and there's a fast running speed, and the jump really catapults you ahead. It's not like a little bounce. You really leap. It was a very slick, fast moving. It almost reminded me of something like Mirror's Edge in terms of the traversal.
Mm. Yeah, I could see that. It's that sort of like incredible forward jump that. Games don't really do that anymore. I felt like it was really, really wild. I guess the other that also surprised me quite a bit this year might have been Death's Door, which, another game from Devolver. So I guess it shouldn't be that big of a surprise, although they're starting to have hits and misses lately. But Death's Door was another one that like I didn't know to expect that one coming. I know it's from I forget the developer now. I knew it was somebody.
Me too. It's their first game. It's a couple of guys from the UK, I believe.
Yeah,
Acid Nerve, is it? Acid Nerve. Is that right?
I feel like one of them. I'm misremembering. I felt like one of them had made a game I'd played previous to that. Now I can't remember what it was. But Death's Door was also a big surprise, and will probably be on my Game of the Year list somewhere. So.
Yeah, I loved that one. I really did. Although I did struggle with it towards the end. The last few bosses really kicked my ass, actually, and took the shine off it just a touch. But for the majority of the time I was playing, I absolutely loved it. Did you go far into the post game with that one? Because I kind of didn't. There's like a lot after the credits, isn't there?
Yeah, so I've definitely heard about the post game, and it sounded pretty incredible. But like I said, like you said, the last few bosses are really the last two bosses really are really brutal, and I definitely enjoyed the game, but I think right after that I sort of felt like I've triumphed, and then I kind of put my controller down and I did not feel like going back to it. I might one day, maybe if there's a big DLC or something, or who knows. And I would 100% play a sequel from those guys. But I don't know, when it came to the like actual end game content, it seemed like a lot of it was like hidden bosses that you had to do various things in the overworld in order to unlock. And while that was cool, I also just sort of didn't find myself in a position where I was like, I got my game out of this. I didn't really feel like hunting down extra bosses.
Yeah, I'm very much like that too. It's a very special game where I'll go and try and 100% it and see everything it has to offer. I felt the same with Death's Door. I feel like the main story was like a full meal, and I didn't go back for I did a little run around in the overworld just to kind of poke around at the edges of the extra content. But I agree with you. That's a lovely game. I especially loved the music and the art in that game. Actually, the gameplay was kind of fine, but the color palette, like the petals outside the Urn Witch's mansion, and the different the painted boards and the swampy kingdom, just had such a lovely touch to everything.
Yeah, it was really gorgeous.
It's a pleasure. But the next one I've got here is because I don't know how you go about making up your end of year lists, but I kind of do it throughout the year. Like if I'm playing something and I really enjoy it, I'll just throw it in a document and think about it later. And then as the year progresses, there are some that get bumped down the list, as the Sables and the Solar Ashes and the Inscriptions landed this year. There were games that got bumped further and further down. They're still very good. They did make it onto my end of year list, but they probably won't ultimately feature. But I feel like those games still deserve a shout out. So I was wondering if there were any games that you thought were very, very solid and enjoyable this year, but perhaps won't scrape onto that end of year list that you'd like to shout out.
It's tricky. Yeah, my game of the year list making approach is pretty haphazard. I don't keep a list going all year, although every year I think like I should do that. I just sort of do a roundup at the end of the year where I try to look at the various things like my Steam library and even just like scrolling back through messages in our show Discord and things like that, trying to make sure that I haven't missed anything. So it's not something where like I have like, something on my list that then later gets bumped off because I don't really start on the list until far too late in the year. I guess I do kind of, when I play something where I'm like, this is actually really great, but it's not like, if it's something that's really great, I usually, and it's even remotely appropriate for the show, we do it for the show. And then it's, and then it's probably somewhere on my list, or at least in my list making process. But there are definitely games where I play where I'm like, this is not appropriate for the show, or what have you. The first thing I can think of that is not going to be anywhere near my game of the year list, because it's not the kind of thing that we do on the show. But that I did spend a lot of time on this year and really appreciated, and it's technically not a 2021 game, although it kind of is, PGA Tour 2K21.
Yes, of course, a golf game, of course.
yeah. They're a bit of a thing for me. That was my sort of one of two major golf games I ended up playing a lot of this year. And from what I gather, from true golf gamer circles, it's not particularly well regarded. When I started really enjoying it a lot, I tweeted about it a couple of times, and I've never had more just sort of drive by. Not exactly hate tweets, but like people, I tweeted something very bland, like, hey, this is a really good golf game. And I got some randos that must be deep in golf game territory, driving by to say, this guy must be being paid by the developer or whatever. What?
Right.
This game obviously sucks. And I think it's because they're folks who want something different out of golf games than I do. People who maybe sort of that's their whole deal. Whereas for me, what I want out of a golf game is I want it to walk a very particular line between simulation and arcadiness. Because things like Mario Golf often sort of tend too far towards the arcadey,
Sure.
style for me. I don't really want to do some goofy, I enjoy those games, but when I want to sit down and play a golf game, I don't always want this sort of maximum goofiness version of that. But I also don't always want to be, putting my ball in the sand trap every single time. I want something where I can tune it a little bit. Yeah. And this game was just extremely tunable. So I was able to sort of tune its little difficulty options into something that made me feel like I was constantly enjoying myself and making progress. And I don't know, I just had a ton of fun with it this year. So technically it came out last year, but it is the 2K21 version of that game. And I really, really liked it a lot. And I think it recently hit, I don't think it was Game Pass. I think PlayStation had it as one of their PlayStation Plus games or something like that.
Right,
but it's free on some platform. So I recommend folks check it out, even if you're not a golf person. It is it requires you to be interested in golf games. It does not require you to be interested in golf
Sure.
culture. You know what I mean?
So you don't have to wear the pleated pants and a visor to.
Yeah. You do, unless you unlock something different. That's definitely
I meant in real life,
definitely your starting
starting
uniform. And unless you spend a lot of time earning coins or whatever, you're going to be wearing a pretty boring golf uniform in it. But I don't know. I find that sort of game very zen and enjoyable. So that's going to be on. If I had a personal GOTY list that wasn't related to the show, it might be on there. But it's not going to be on my official list.
Right. Actually, I played one golf game this year, and I haven't played one since I was a teenager back on the Commodore Amiga when I used to play a bit of PGA. But I played Golf Club Wasteland this year. Have you tried that one?
Oh, yes, very briefly. But I didn't play very much of it. It was one of those things that just came out at just the wrong moment. I was very interested in that. I love the idea of combining a straight up golf game with a sort of satirical narrative. And satiring some things that I think are great to skewer, and golf culture in particular is also very easy to skewer because it is this posh, waste of space. And I think for personally, I think golf is a waste of space, and we should be golfing exclusively in video games, perhaps. But
right, rewild the golf courses of the world.
yeah, or build houses, man, whatever, but I have not gotten far enough in that to have any thoughts on it. I just think it's a good idea. How did you come on with it?
It's one that I've been meaning to do an episode on, actually, because while I found the golf mechanics themselves to be somewhat rudimentary, there is a lot of visual appeal to it as you're golfing through a wasteland or the wreckage of what once was Earth, and humanity has moved to Mars, and you're a guy who's back on Earth golfing. So you're golfing through the ruins of, society. But the thing that I loved about it that kept me going, because the mechanics were a little basic, but you're doing a lot of ricocheting and going up and down escalators and this kind of stuff. It's all part of the gimmick. But they made a radio show that goes along with the game. It's like a podcast. And I played for, I think it took me 3 hours to finish the game. And throughout that 3 hours, I was constantly listening to new material. And it's very, very interesting. That was actually the thing I enjoyed most about it, was that it's a sort of a speculative sci-fi podcast with a host who interviews various guests from this Martian colony and the different lives they have and how politics has been shaped up there and attitudes towards Earth. And as you're playing, having like basic fun with a basic golf game, you're getting quite a good story in a very interesting way. And that stuck with me, actually. The podcast and the radio show that comes along with Golf Club Wasteland was actually the main event of that game for me.
Man, I really should have made time for that. That sounds right up my alley. I need to go back for that. There's so many coming down to the end of the year is getting into the sort of game of the year time of year. It's constantly just finding games that were on my list and that I never got around to, or whatever. That's why I can never really feel 100% confident about a game of the year list, because it's always peppered with holes of things that, like, how can I say that this game is the best game of the year when I haven't even played Solar Ash yet, or whatever, and so I ended up having all these games where I've played like 5 minutes of them, thinking like, oh, this was neat, and then I just didn't have time to put any more time into it. That's definitely one. So hope I find some time for it, but what we need is a year where no games come out, where I can catch up for a while.
Just the backlog year.
Yeah.
I think I hope you do get to Golf Club Wasteland. I did think of you whilst playing it, because I know that you are a golf game enthusiast, and that's quite a quirky one and an unusual take on the genre for sure.
Yeah, we don't get that sort of thing very often. I think golf games as a mechanic, I think it doesn't cross over very often into sort of the mainstream indie interest, and you don't see very many indie games doing that space anyway. I think the only thing that we've had that really felt like a big crossover hit golf game would have been Golf Story, I guess, maybe, and also
sure.
What's that very wacky golf game? What the Golf?
Yeah, that was fun. That was a fun one. It's not really that much of a golf game, but it was.
It's not. Yeah, it's not a golf game in my opinion. It's a
hitting things with things.
It's a physics game. Yeah, but still, I think that shows that people aren't allergic to golf games. I'd like to see I'd like to see more developers take a swing at that, so to speak. So,
pun absolutely intended. I can tell that.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. But the next one I've got here is actually a game that, because there are games that come out that no one seems to have played, and that we all latch onto one or two and kind of wonder why they didn't find a bigger audience. And it's one thing that I quite enjoy about podcasting, is that you can try a lot of things, find a game that hasn't perhaps found its audience or hit the mainstream in quite the way that you feel it deserves, and spotlighting and recommending those games is a really fun part of what I enjoy about podcasting. And I've certainly found a lot of games of that type through the short game, but I was wondering if there was anything that you played this year that you feel deserves more of a spotlight, and you'd like to push into someone's hand and say, play this one. It's really good, I promise you.
Yeah, the first thing that comes to mind is probably Carto, which technically isn't a 2021 game. It came out in 2020, I believe, but we played it in early 2021 for the show. Carto, Carto. It's on Game Pass, which is great because I think it is finding a little bit of an audience there, but that's a game that, like, it's a combination of sort of adventure and puzzle game about sort of takes place on a map where you're kind of you're able to sort of reconfigure the map as part of the puzzle mechanics, and it's just a really lovely little game that had a nice story and was just a breeze to play and was, I don't know, just very, very charming all throughout. So, and I don't think I've seen anyone talk about it much at all. I think it got, a handful of little articles about it when it first came out. But, I didn't see it on anybody's. Also, I think it came out late enough in 2020 that it didn't make it onto a lot of people's Game of the Year lists. And if we played it early enough in 2021 that it kind of feels like last year, I was thinking about it. I was like, oh God, that was this year. So I don't know if we'll end up talking about it on our Game of the Year list because it's a bit of a odd placement to do that with. But I loved it, and I wish it had gotten a little bit more attention.
Yeah, that was a really pleasant game. I did give it a try because it was on Game Pass. It's quite ingenious in a way, isn't it? It's a little bit of a Zelda-like top-down, running around in a colourful world, talking to people and solving stuff. But it has that really interesting mechanic of being able to look at your map and almost turn jigsaw pieces and link the world together in a different way. And then when you leap out of your map again, the world has been reconfigured by your kind of vigilante cartography that you've been doing.
Well put. Yeah, I thought it was just really charming, and I thought the writing was like nicely done, and I don't know, I thought it was overall very enjoyable, a beautiful little, like, fairly simple. Like, you can take a look at a trailer for that and know exactly what you're going to be playing. But and obviously like an effort from a small indie studio and all that. But I thought it was just a lovely thing.
Yeah, very crisply designed. It was one of those ones that just feels very finished and very, it's quite simple, but everything was done well and just nicely polished, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
I liked its soundtrack quite a bit, and yeah, it was just overall really, really cute game that I liked a lot. I guess the other thing that I would think about is it got a little more press than something like Carto, but I feel like not enough folks talked about the Forgotten City this year.
Right.
Which, spoilers for my personal Game of the Year list, but it's easily very high on it. I'm not exactly sure where, but it just had a lot of things that I find really personally compelling in games and also just in generally in fiction, which, it's ancient Roman stuff is very big for me. I think that's, a very interesting historical period. And while it's obviously very heightened and gamey, it had some nice ancient Roman stuff in it. It's not a setting you see in games very often, even though I think it's a very interesting historical setting. And then, of course, the time loop aspect to it is, this sort of Groundhog Day style, like trying to find a way to break the time loop, solving a mystery with that, with that as the background. That is incredible. And it's got an interesting sort of development story too, with it having started as a Skyrim mod and then being a complete re-engineering of that to kind of strip out the Skyrim related material while sort of rebuilding it in a new engine with a new team, and finding that, stripping out all of the dwarves and replacing them with like Romans actually was additive instead of subtractive. Like it was not like just filing the serial numbers off and replacing dwarves with other kinds of dwarves that are less, copyright encumbered, but instead like finding this whole new way to approach this story in a way that really felt even more interesting and relevant. Like I thought it was fantastic. So, I know it got enough press to do well. It didn't crash and burn or anything. But I haven't heard folks talking about it enough in terms of their, end of year wrap ups and whatever, but it was a big highlight for me.
Yeah. It seems like people that have played it all the way through really are passionate about how much they like it, but that just perhaps wasn't that many people. Although that one has come to Game Pass 2 now, hasn't it? So it's available.
I forgot it. Yeah. Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah, so everyone should give that a shot if they have a Game Pass subscription, and I think it's a really terrific game.
Yeah, I liked that when you talk to the main, I forget his name now, the mayor guy, he kind of fills you in on, you can question him on the philosophy of the time and like how how society functioned back then, and that's part of the story and it's part of the mechanics, like and the ethics and morals and the philosophy of that time are woven into the story in quite a cool way.
Mm-hmm. It is really a sort of a philosophical game. I mean, it's a game where I hope this isn't too much of a spoiler, but like there are several characters you can have extensive philosophical conversations with about the implications of what's going on in the game, including being able to like find a character just called the Philosopher who will have a lengthy conversation with you that is just an opportunity for the developers to really lay out their personal thoughts on the implication of their story. And it's really interesting. Like, you know, it's a very heightened setting and, you know, idea, and all of the, you know, the big reveals of the game are, you know, they're big ideas, sci-fi stuff. But it's, you know, it's really tied together with like an interesting sort of philosophical through line. So I can't recommend it enough.
Yeah, it's a good choice. I'm interested to see if that one does pop up on some end of your list as well. It does seem to have passionate champions, and I think I will try and push on through. And I think I was 5 or 6 hours in, so I was really just scratching the surface of the grand puzzle. But I would like to come back to it and see where they go with that story and premise.
Mm. It has a couple of endings, and it's worth getting all of them. It's got some really terrific stuff in the endings. So,
But the next thing that we've got here is, I mean, I tend to use Gaming in the Wild as a recommender podcast most of the time. Play a lot of things and take the cream of the crop and give them an episode. But occasionally there are games that I find bad in an interesting way, and I will sometimes talk about those on the show as well. So I was wondering if there were any games like that came up for you this year. I know that the Short Game is a recommender podcast in spirit most of the time as well. It likes to put forward things that people may not have heard of or might want to try. But I was wondering if there were any games that you played this year that you perhaps had expectations for or hoped would be good, and didn't quite make it, or games that didn't quite hook you or that you didn't enjoy.
Yeah, I don't. That's just right. That like I don't spend a lot of time. If something isn't good, like if we play something and I don't, doesn't grab any of us, we'll still do an episode on it if even one of us can be a passionate defender of the game, because sometimes those are the most interesting episodes. But then sometimes, there's just a game that nobody likes well enough to, and then we typically just don't do an episode on those unless there's something we really want to say about it. I guess the big two standouts of that for this year, the first one would be 12 Minutes, which we did do an episode on. It's pretty rare that we have a game that, and then, there were some things that we had to say about that were positive. But by and large, I thought that game was a writing failure. It was an interesting concept, and it was something that we really wanted to see in games, sort of, playing with time loops in a point and click adventure narrative, trying to do a thriller kind of vibe. And, we talked about that game for quite a while, and, we had a lot to say about it. But overall, I thought that game was pretty hard to like. And for a lot of reasons, we did a whole episode where I talked at length about all of the different issues with that game. But I was really looking forward to it. I really thought it was going to be a winner, and then didn't quite like it. And then sometimes we end up with a game that, like, I think is going to be a really great game and I'm really looking forward to, and we just don't end up covering it all for similar sort of reasons. And I think the main one that came up this year that happened like that was Last Stop from Variable State. Did you play any of that?
I played a little, and it really didn't stick with me, actually. It was part of that run from Annapurna, one of my favorite publishers, where they put out, I think, Maquette, Last Stop, and 12 Minutes all came in a row. Very excited for all three of them, played all three of them, didn't like any of them, really.
Yeah. Last Stop in particular, I was really looking forward to, because this is the second game from the developers that made Virginia. And Virginia was like controversial on our podcast, but I was its big defender. Like I loved Virginia. It had this sort of like David Lynchian, like, no dialogue, lots of smash cuts, sometimes some potentially surreal imagery. It played like like watching a Twin Peaks finale or something like that, right? And I thought it was brilliant. And no one else on the podcast liked it. Everyone else thought it sucked. And so I was really looking forward to another game from those people because I thought, well, this will be a vindication, right? Like this will be like I liked Virginia because these developers really, they know how to make a deftly crafted game with good storytelling and interesting editing and whatnot, and everyone else just didn't understand, man. And then I played Last Stop, and it was just like really meh. The stories were not particularly
right. It's a strangely clunky game, isn't it?
It had just the way that it played. Like it felt like the closest thing I can think of. Like it felt a lot like playing like some of the old 3D LucasArts stuff, like Grim Fandango, where like they hadn't figured out how to have you walk fixed camera angles, Resident Evil style, where you're walking a character around in 3D, and that element of it just completely took me out of it. Like it was really clunky just to move around, and then the dialogue and everything, just the writing didn't grab me. It had this sort of like, yeah, 3 stories trying to tie together into it seemed to have a sort of a hints at a central mystery that I didn't get far enough with it to unravel because it just didn't interest me enough to do that. Anyway, that one was quite a disappointment, but oh well.
Yeah, I actually found Virginia through Short Game, actually, and did a little episode on it sometime, I think, last year. That was an intriguing one, the wordlessness of it and the way it was put together, the way the story was delivered to you. It was all quite interesting. And the art style was interesting. So I had high hopes for Last Stop too, and something about it. I remember playing the intro, and when that mechanic you're describing, the Grim Fandango thing, when you're running to the right, suddenly there's a cinematic camera change. You're still pushing right, but you're now moving left. And so you perhaps correct on the stick. I always correct on the stick and end up running back out of the screen. And that it's like an old-fashioned mechanic that's kind of long gone now most of the time, but here it was again in Last Stop.
That never works. It never works. I don't know why people would consider going back to that. Like, I certainly understand the impulse to do like these cinematic camera angle changes, but don't make a human being pilot a character through that. If you want these cinematic camera angle changes, like Virginia let you do that in first person. And that works. You can do a smash cut in first person. They were with Virginia. They were doing the same sort of editing that was like so revolutionary and sort of created with. Or I'm sure there's antecedents to everything, but like it was like basically 30 Flights of Loving, which I think is like absolutely foundational short game that is. Really brilliant and just had a nice remaster. So if anybody hasn't played 30 Flights of Loving, it has recently been updated for its, I don't know what anniversary, and 9th, I think. And has like a new version out that's playable on more modern systems and on Mac and everything. So look for 30 Flights of Loving and Virginia, both excellent examples of like film-like editing in games, but doing film-like editing while you're doing like actually walking around in third person is a nightmare. Don't do that.
Yeah, exactly. But the next category we've got here is actually, unless you have any more in that one, is were there any big first-party games that you played this year? Were there any AAAs? Because it's definitely not short game material. Usually, most of the time, those games are, a bit big, a bit long, and not quite in the aesthetic as well, not quite in that indie feel that the short game has. But I tend to play like a couple of AAAs a year. I am a little hype prone. It's not my proudest aspect, but I will sometimes get sucked into it if I hear someone championing a game. Like I ended up buying Guardians of the Galaxy this year. And
I want to check that out. It really seems like a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. It's an interesting one. Good dialogue, good world and everything. And Ratchet and Clank was a pack-in with my PS5, so I ended up playing that one as well. But I was wondering if you played any this year, if any of those AAA or first-party games or, the big ones caught your attention, and if so, what were they?
So Not a ton this year. Like that's usually me too. Typically any given year I'll play, one or two big AAA games and kind of string them along in the background while I'm, jumping from short game to short game. And this year hasn't really been that for me. I don't know what exactly changed, but I've done very little of that. So I already talked about Near Replicant, which I did a lot of that with earlier in the year. And then right now I'm working my way through bits and pieces of Forza Horizon 5, which isn't really like, I don't play a lot of racing games, but this series is a lot of fun. So, it doesn't really feel like engaging with a AAA game in the way that you're probably asking about there, because like for me, those sorts of games, it's, I'm not really working towards any goals in that game. I'm sort of drifting from little race to little race just to, look at fancy graphics and enjoy car go fast, So not really a big year for big or AAA games for me. I think there's probably one or two other things I'm not thinking of at the moment. But yeah, not a ton.
That was actually my first Forza game. Was 5, and because it's on Game Pass, it's not something that I probably would have bought, but I decided to give it a try, and I was really blown away by it. Actually, I had never played an open world driving game before, for a start. And just the graphics of it, the structure of it is very cool. The way you can just go from a dirt track race to, stunt driving to narrative tasks. And you can really kind of like a skipping stone just go through. It feels like 5 different racing games pushed into one, It could have been like a really cool beach dune buggy game, really cool like road racing game. But they've just taken all of those greatest hits of driving games and put them in one. I was really pleasantly surprised by that one. I wasn't expecting to like it as much as I did, actually.
Yeah. I think having that sort of thing on Game Pass is like a great pitch for that service, because it is something that's going to appeal to a lot of different people. And it has that sort of like, anybody can sit down and play a driving game kind of thing, but it also serves as this like technical showpiece, right? So if you're on it'll play on a base model Xbox One or a PC of really any type, but it'll also play on the, fancy graphics card or on the fancy new Series X or whatever, and make you feel like you're really getting something out of your fancy new hardware. And that's definitely part of the appeal for me, being able to like I have late last year, I ended up getting a nice graphics card, and so this year has been like, I've been looking for good opportunities to use it. And most of the games that I play are these like, 2D things, or, something with like
pixel art indies and stuff.
yeah. Or low poly or whatever. So, it's really nice when I find something that I can put a little time into and feel like, oh wow, I'm getting really amazing graphics out of this card. But yeah, I can't think of much else that I've played this year that I'd consider like, great AAA.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Forza's a good answer. I mean, the thing I liked about that one too, just to tie that one up, is it kind of has the feel of a game that has some kind of simulation going on, but it really doesn't. It's very arcadey, and it has that very easy accessibility with that line on the road that gives you an indication of if your speed is appropriate for a corner. So it's very gentle with the player, and I found it very approachable too, but it has the look of it and the feel of like a proper racing game, in inverted commas, but just a very easy pick up and playability to it,
Yeah, this is my third of those that I've played, but I put a lot of time into Forza Horizon 3 because there was a period where I had bought an Xbox, and pretty much only played Forza Horizon 3 on it. I had it for almost a year and just found out at the end of that year that like, wow, I'm never booting this thing up. I'm only playing on Switch and on, I forget what all. So I ended up selling it. And that was the only thing that I really missed, the Forza games. So, I was glad to dip back in, and it was good timing when it came out. Like, I was just needing a mindless driving thing like that when it came out. It was perfect timing.
Yeah, it was it was a pleasure, that one. But we have talked about publishers a little bit already. We've talked about Annapurna are having like maybe their first losing streak as a publisher, because they've had a pretty spotless output. I mean, I think before that run of 3 games, Maquette, Last Stop, and 12 Minutes, Ashen was the only game that I hadn't liked, and they just seem to be on an endless winning streak. And then we've mentioned Devolver as having a good year because of Death's Door, Inscription, and Boomerang X. But I was wondering if there were any publishers that you particularly follow, or anyone that you think has had a particularly strong year in 2020.
I guess I was going to just sort of point back to Devolver. They had a really good year this year. They had a really ton of great stuff. Just, the last thing on the list being Inscription that was pretty incredible. Devolver it's the easy answer when you asking about the sorts of games that I enjoy or that that we cover on the Short Game, because they are very specifically focused on these sort of small indie things, and they do a really good job of marketing. Basically, they clearly put more money into marketing that can't afford to put a lot of money into marketing for small indies, which is something that you don't see from a lot of other publishers. And they just have such a volume. There's a new Devolver release every couple of weeks or whatever. I don't sort of follow publishers in that way in a lot of that space. Like small indie releases, a lot of them are either, they're not represented by a publisher, or they have a publisher, but it's not really part of, it's not really a publisher that has like a brand that's like a curated selection the way that something like Devolver does. But I don't know. I think Devolver really killed it this year. They had an amazing streak there where they had Boomerang X, followed by Death's Door, followed by, I forget what was right after that. But it felt like they had like 3 crazy good games within like 3 weeks of each other, and just really incredible. Let's see, who published. I guess that's the only one I can think of. Like, there's a lot of others were like, that's an amazing game. And I'm trying to think if they published anything else this year that a lot of great publishers had really like 1 or 2 really great games this year, but Devolver had a great year, I think.
Yeah, I agree with you. As we were getting towards the Game of the Year time, I was looking around to see if there was anything particular that should have been on Gaming in the Wild, but perhaps wasn't, So I went through the catalogue of people like Raw Fury and Annapurna and Devolver, and there were a few Devolver games that I hadn't played. There was Olija, Olija, that pixel art.
Oh yeah, I played a bit of that. I didn't love it, but I could definitely see the appeal. But it was a fine game. We almost covered it for the show, but you have to sort of like it has this sort of cinematic platformer style a little bit, sort of like things like Another World, and a lot of that same style of like being in an alien space, mixed with a little bit of Metroidvania. And I'll typically play anything that says it's a Metroidvania and is under 10 hours. I didn't end up finishing that one though. I found its combat really difficult to make work for me. And
right, I've kind of button mashed my way through it so far, to be honest.
Yeah, it wasn't hard exactly, or there were parts that were, but it was more just sort of, I don't know, something about it was not pleasing. So I ended up dropping it after about I don't remember, maybe 4 or 5 hours. Right.
Same here actually. I'm paused on it at least. I've been playing it recently. I think I must be close to the end now. I understand that it is quite a short title, but yeah, I agree with you. The combat is a little bit loose. Like it feels like, it has this thing that you can, the spear that you can throw and then kind of teleport to where it is, and a few different weapons. But something about the way that you shift through the weapons and the way that the enemies move, it all feels very, very loose. But I have enjoyed the story of it, and the pixel art is really nice. But yeah, that was one that I went through when I was just leafing through Devolver's catalogue to make sure that I hadn't missed anything, because they are really that kind of publisher where everything that they put out is at least worth a try. So I quite agree with you. And I love the way that they talk about games as well. They have a very playful voice as an organization. It just seems kind of rare. They're very light on their feet and just don't take it too seriously. And they're just an entertaining entity, aren't they?
Yeah. They're I don't know, comedy style with their marketing doesn't always land for me, but the proof is in the pudding. They do good they do choose and support good games that I enjoy. So, you know, I'm not exactly standing for Devolver. I don't love everything about their you know, vibe all the time. Yeah, their shtick. But I really do like pretty much they put out a game and I'll at the very least try to give it a try because there's the good track record. Yeah, and Annapurna this year like was a bit of a letdown. Like they'd been like all killer no filler like last year, for example, and then this year you're right, they had a kind of a weird run, and you can kind of see how they got there with some of these games, like 12 Minutes and Maquette in particular, like both games that were like long in development, very like lengthy, like lots of coverage over the years, lots of people like checking in on them at various shows and things, games that demo really well, but didn't end up holding together well in their final forms. And like, you see their whole approach, Annapurna, is like take these games that are maybe like most of the way there, are tour projects that are, you know, just in need of like they seem to come in at times when these games have maybe been in development a little while and need a little extra funding to kind of get them over the line. And I like that that's a thing that they do. And I certainly like that they, you know, they seem to generally have good taste in the sort of things they do that sort of support on. But I don't know, that Maquette and 12 Minutes in particular just sort of felt like their approach was just sort of taking these games that really what they needed was, you know, another writer to come in and take another look at the script. And instead what they got was like, you know, voiceover by Daisy Ridley or what have you. And like that can be good, but if it's on top of a game that's like really kind of suffering from some pretty dire flaw, yeah. So anyway, that was a bit of a disappointment.
Yeah.
Last year I would have said Annapurna probably to the same question.
Yeah, completely. But they did bring it back at the end. I mean, they had. I was a huge fan of the Artful Escape. Actually, I
still
kind of
haven't
saw
tried
ads
that.
for it throughout the year. There were ads, and the art style was intriguing. But you know, I didn't kind of have extremely high hopes for it. But honestly, it was one of the most colorful, joyful games that I played this year. Really, I think I smiled throughout the duration of it. It's just ridiculous sci-fi space opera with lots of guitar solos and sci-fi surrealism, like those old book covers that you'll see with rolling deserts and alien vistas and stuff, mixed with this slightly kind of Bill and Ted humor from the Australian writer who created the game. It's not something that I expected to like, but actually really, really did. It was just like a lovely ride, you know, not much in terms of demands. It was very simple. It's pretty much just running from left to right and soloing and making the world light up around you. But it was a really fun one. And then, of course, they had Solar Ash at the end of the year, which I have covered on the show and was something that I was really looking forward to and completely fulfilled its promise for me at least, and has made it onto my own Games of the Year list.
Yeah, I'm still working on Solar Ash. I think my brother is playing it too and is a little ahead of me, and I think it's a game that doesn't have the greatest first impression. I think it needs a little more time to like, for me, that first hour or so just didn't really work super well. But from what I've seen, everything after that is really like, then you start seeing these like much larger, more sort of Shadow of the Colossus-y kind of enemies. And that's really interesting. And so I think I just need to get over a hump with that one, but I'm definitely still working at it. Hopefully I can get through it by the end of the year. We'll see.
Yeah, that first area is actually quite featureless compared to the the other biomes that you will come across in that game. It's one of those infamous tutorial island kind of environments where it's really just walking you through how the different mechanics work. But even the second and third worlds, I think it really picks up with the verticality and the variety and lore all starts to come together. I do agree with you that first part, I rocketed through it pretty quickly and just was straight on to the kind of the city environment that comes soon after. So I kind of just raced through that piece, that part of the game. But I can see that if you're playing in short bursts, it maybe wouldn't make the best impression. But I think that game really does get there by the end for sure. I'm curious to hear what your take on it is by the time you get through it.
Yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to putting some more time into it.
Yeah, but the final thing, I mean, not to preempt the Short Game's own Game of the Year episode, of course, which I always look forward to very much, and have been like leafing through the archive there to listen to the old Game of the Year episodes and pick up some ideas of things to play. But I mean, you can answer this one any way that you want, because I don't want to preempt your own Games of the Year episode, of course. But do you have like a short list of games that you're thinking of, or just personal favorites from the year?
Yeah, it's tricky. You know, and obviously I don't want to 100%, like I don't actually know how my list is going to look yet. I still haven't really put anything in order. Recency bias is a big factor, and so I'm trying to make sure I'm not just immediately going to the thing that I loved most recently, but it's going to be really hard to unseat Inscription for me. Inscription was it's hard to talk about because it's a game that like does a really good job of sort of hiding a lot of what's really incredible about it. But even the game that it is on the surface is really surprisingly great and fun. A game that I thought like in a genre that I thought I was already a little tired of, the sort of like deck building roguelike. This game finds ways to, iterate on that and surprise you in with new things you haven't seen in other deck building roguelikes, and then continues to find ways to surprise you through its entire run. And it's also like not an endless kind of experience like a lot of deck building roguelikes kind of intend to be, where there's essentially no skill cap and no true ending. You're going to be playing this game until you're old and gray kind of approach, like some of things like, but instead it feels very tight and self-contained, and it's a mystery and it lets you solve that mystery, and I love that about it. So Inscription is probably on my list at the top, but I have to really search my soul to compare it against some of the other stuff I mentioned earlier.
Yeah, I feel quite the same about Inscription. I mean, I tried to do an episode about it and found it one of the most difficult episodes that I've done, because to try and sell people on how good the game is, whilst you can't talk about 2/3 of it without spoiling it, it was quite a challenge to do a review of that game, because there are so many secrets tucked away there. Yeah,
that's why we ended up doing that game as 2 episodes, which we've almost never done. I think the only other time I can think of us doing 2 episodes on a single game back to back like that would have been when we talked about Undertale, which had a lot of it's not that they're necessarily that similar in terms of really anything, but they're both games that have just like, they have the game they are on the surface, and then there's so much more under the surface. And that was something I kind of expected. I've played, I had previously played Pony Island by Daniel Mullins, which has a little bit of that same approach, which is, it appears on the surface to be, but that game is trying much less hard to hide what it is. So I think, you can also look at something like Frog Fractions, where it's it's one game on the surface, and then it hides these other things. But rather than something like Frog Fractions, where it's literally just trying to, appear to be this edutainment thing, and under the surface is a kind of a grab bag of other bizarre sort of micro games almost. Inscription has that same level of like shock and surprise as it throws you enormous curveballs and pulls the rug out from under you, while also still feeling like a single consistent game that lets you build a competency over time. Like even in the depths of the third act, I was still using skills and knowledge that I'd kind of put together during those first few hours, even though I suddenly felt like I was playing, a game like hugely removed from that initial version. I think it's really just a brilliantly constructed thing. So can't recommend that one enough, and probably at the top of my Game of the Year list, but that is also, again, sort of recency bias, hard to really place these things.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I remember as I was playing Inscription, I I kind of just knew that this was probably going to be Game of the Year for me as well. There was just nothing that had amazed me and shocked me and kind of surprised me as much as Inscription does. Like a lot of games, you know what you're getting into with most games. You know, you've kind of seen the trailer or you have some idea of the developer or whatever. But Inscription was just one that just seemed so imaginative in the way that it plays with expectation and pulls the rug out from under your feet in a genuinely surprising way. I mean, as I was playing that one, just after the first chapter, when you get some unexpected content there to do with card games, I immediately thought of Shane, actually. I was like, this game seems like it was made for Shane.
Yeah. He was the one that demanded we cover it after he tried it, and I was skeptical because Shane is much more into card games than I am. But yeah, this one really, really did it for me.
Yeah, that was a great game. I think we're on the same page with that one. But yeah, thanks very much for making the time to come and talk. It's a real pleasure to have you on and to hear about your games of the year. People should definitely go and check out the Short Game podcast weekly. Short indies. I think if you like gaming in the wild, you'll certainly like the Short Game. And it's been a real pleasure to talk to you, Raygan.
Thanks. Likewise. Yeah, it's great to have to come on, and we'll have to return the favor sometime soon. Have you come on the Short Game and talk about some short game you like?
Yeah, it would be a pleasure. That would be a real pleasure. And where can people go to find out about you and the Short Game online?
Oh, if you want to find me, you could find me on Twitter at RayganK. That's RayGanK. And you can find my show, The Short Game, on all of the various podcast services. So easiest would just be search for The Short Game in your podcast app, or you can find us at theshortgame.net or on Twitter at _shortgame. Yeah,
and you definitely should. Definitely a standout podcast for me and a real pleasure every week. So thanks for all your good work.
Thanks. Yeah, you too.
So thanks very much to Raygan again for that great conversation. It was really fun to have him on. I'm a huge fan of the Short Game podcast. I do suggest that you go and look it up. If you like gaming in the wild, you're probably going to like the Short Game too. But it's not the last Games of the Year episode that we have. There are a couple more to come. With further guests, they'll be out in the next couple of weeks. If you would like to stay in touch with the show, tell me what your Games of the Year are, or keep an eye out for those further Games of the Year episode, you can find me on Twitter as Gaming in the Wild, also on Instagram, YouTube and Facebook. There is also that Patreon if you'd like to support the show at patreon.com/gaminginthewild. I'll be back next week with a new episode. Take care of yourselves and each other. Thanks for listening, and bye-bye for now.